right, everyone, hello and welcome to the next installment of Dronebox. I am here with my guest co-host, Vince Eckert.
Hello, everybody.
You saw him before on our first episode. He's back to talk to us again, and he is wearing a cowboy hat to
Howdy.
and drinking a beer to demonstrate that there is literally almost nothing you can do that will make you less legitimate than Fox News.
It's 100% true. I agree there.
Yeah, I mean, Vince is trying and still failing, and we love you for it, buddy.
Taking one for the team here.
So all jokes aside, pleasure to have you back, and we're glad to be talking to you.
I'm glad to be here.
So what we are going to be talking about today, as evidenced by our first photo that we're showing, is in the news recently. We've had a lot of talk about the Greek financial crisis, and it's following in suit with a number of other nations, over the course of years, not only in Europe but around the world, that have had these massive financial breakdowns. And so what we're going to do is sort of talk about Greece by way of talking about some other things that have happened in the past and introducing some terms and familiarizing ourselves with a couple of the institutions that have been key players. I won't say it's their fault because,
it's everyone's fault.
I don't want it to sound like I'm taking a side, but there are certain institutions that have been key factors, key players that have been present when all of these horrible things have happened. And so we're going to go through a few of those. First off, and I apologize, my picture order has gotten completely mixed up here, so you're going to see a few things that we're going to go over later, and want to find my way through here real quick.
Well, that's the world at large.
The world at large. So what is one of the institutions that is a big key player in this right now is the European Central Bank.
Oh, yeah.
It is the chief financial entity of the Eurozone, the member nations of the European Union. So now, what the European Central Bank does is it makes policy for all of its union members.
Sure.
What it does is it has the authority to manufacture the money for all of these nations. Then what it does is it loans that money to the central banks of the concerned nations.
That sounds like a great racket.
Yeah, and the even better part is it loans it to them, as you might guess, at interest.
Oh, fantastic.
So that...
Who profits from this?
Well, the European Central Bank certainly does. And here's the problem with it. Here's how it is. Normally, if you take out a loan, you have that money, but then you also have another source of income, right? So the interest that is due on the loan that you take out, you have extra money coming in from other places, and so you can pay it. Okay, well, what happens is, if you are a nation that's having trouble, and that's your only money that you have coming in, you could pay every dollar that is in circulation, and there would still be a debt owed. That's what happens when you allow a third party to manufacture the money of a nation.
Because it used to be, if a nation got in over its head, what it would do is just sort of like, make all debts disappear, just a collective bankruptcy kind of thing.
Right, and or your nation, being the manufacturer of its own money, would just print more money.
Sure.
To satisfy this debt. And that's really as simple as it needs to be. But when you have a third party, like the European Central Bank, or as we will get into later, the Federal Reserve Bank, who prints our money and loans it to us at interest, they get to choose how much money is in circulation. And so if you have debts that you need to pay and all of a sudden there's no more money in circulation, what do you do? Well, we're going to find out as we go through this episode a little bit more Vince is rubbing his chin like
I'm interested. I want to know what happened.
Like a pondering cowboy should. So
I'm out on the range of life, man.
Yep, as we all are. So now it's not just the European Central Bank. Over the decades, the European Central Bank is a fairly recent entity that came into existence with the creation of the European Union. So it was about 27 years ago.
Okay.
Not a very long time, but an excellent track record for ruining economies. Good job, ECB. Okay, so now let's
making serious progress in its short span of life.
Yeah, absolutely. So okay, we're going to get into this stuff, and again, I apologize for the photographs being all mashed up. Okay, so there's another player that's been involved in the collapse of many countries over the years, and that is the International Monetary Fund.
Everybody loves this one.
Yeah, they've been around for much longer and have a much more fantastic record of ruining people and nations and all of that kind of good stuff. Now, the International Monetary Fund came into being in 1945. This was with the close of World War II. Everyone had these massive, massive war debts, or at least almost everyone. And so the IMF came into being with the originally with the noble concept of helping to end world poverty.
Sure.
And so, as you might remember if you watched our episode.
It doesn't seem like it's ended though, and that was a long time ago.
No, certainly not. Anytime. Well, and this is where we go back, and I wanted to make sure I introduced George Orwell first in a previous episode, because Orwell talks about these institutions that are created to accomplish a thing, and then they end up doing the exact opposite. So the IMF is there to end world poverty. It has created massive, massive poverty worldwide,
sure.
which we'll get into in a little bit.
Actually, it's a destabilizing force rather than a stabilizing one.
Absolutely. And Orwell was always talking about how the Ministry of Truth were the ones that were printing propaganda and manufacturing the party line that the Ministry of Peace, right, as he talked about in 1984, were the ones that concerned themselves with waging war,
yep.
right? And all of these things working together. And while that was a work of fiction, this is real life. And so the IMF came into being, end of World War II, okay, we covered that. And what happens is financially solvent nations will pay into a certain amount of money every year, a certain percentage of either their gross domestic product or just a certain blanket amount.
Sure.
They will deposit this money into the monetary fund with the expressed intent of helping out developing nations. The only problem is these developing nations are not only subject to the crippling interest rate that is, and it's not a huge interest rate, but when you consider that if you have nothing and you take out a loan,
and plus these are large sums of money. I mean, like
that's exactly right.
Exceeding large sums.
These are billions of dollars.
So think about the interest of that. The interest of 1% or something, or even less than that, it's still going to be astronomical.
Yeah, on a $100 billion loan is $1 billion.
Yeah, exactly. And if your GDP isn't $1 billion, that doesn't even make sense.
Well, yeah, it makes sense if you want to commandeer a nation's assets. And so, and that's exactly what the International Monetary Fund does, because in addition to the interest rate that they charge, they also have these like kind of exotic stipulations and strings attached. Amongst them is that if you default on your loan payments, which you're pretty much guaranteed to do, you are required to allow the privatization of your country's resources or land holdings or...
That seems like a bum deal.
Yeah, it really, it sucks. Oh, here we go. Here's my notes. Okay. So, let's see, International Monetary here's all of the member nations of the International Monetary Fund. Oops, oh my goodness. Okay, that was the previous one. Again, my apologies. Okay, so the members in dark green are member nations, and the light green members are like kind of recipients of. And so that's a lot, right? That is a pretty world-dominating sort of thing.
It seems like for the most part, those countries aren't doing so well.
No, it doesn't seem to me either. And you know, these are countries, and Ecuador used to be on the receiving end of this. And
as recently as
I believe it was 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, okay. So this is a very recent development.
Very recent thing, and so to speak more about the IMF, we have these stipulations that the IMF imposes on its beneficiaries, the nations receiving this aid, that if they default, they have to basically sign over their land and natural resources to a very startling extent. And you might say, well, you know, they defaulted on a loan. If you default on your house payment, you get evicted from your house. The bank repossesses
Sure, but how do you do that to a country, right?
Right. Well,
I mean, the whole thing is absurd. I mean, it's really sort of a territorialist, aggressive sort of stance.
It turns out here's how, and it is most certainly territorial. Now, this is the nation of Ecuador, and the areas in yellow are land that the country of Ecuador has been forced to lease to private, call it what you want, logging concerns, oil concerns.
Oh, golly.
Shell and Chevron have created massive amounts of pollution there. And this is rainforest land.
Yeah, I mean, Ecuador has abundant natural resources.
And so what this represents is fully, as it stands right now, about 1/3 of its natural forest land. You see that area in yellow?
Yeah.
That's protected land. Everything else is up for grabs whenever it is that the IMF says, all right, you defaulted on your loan, now you have to let some you know, foreign oil company drill on your land. And
that's terrible.
Yeah, and now you know, as we've already said, much of this is rainforest land. It's not really the government of Ecuador that is being called to task on defaulting. These are indigenous tribes that are having their land cut down and having their land, you know, I mean, oil pipelines break. It's what
absolutely. We saw it in Santa Barbara not very long ago.
Yeah, Santa Barbara, this one that's running up the middle of the country. It's had some breaks along it. The Gulf of Mexico, like all of these things.
They're prone to flaw. I mean,
right, and especially now when it happens in America, you can assume that, like, or at least you'd like to assume that there was a lot of safeguards involved, and oh man, you know, it just, you know, was this freak accident.
Yeah,
oh,
there's a redundant safety system. You know, there should be more than one check on things, but somehow it's always like, well, this line was scheduled for maintenance next week, right? Like that's always the line.
Well, right, and when it happens in America, you have cleaning crews out immediately. You have representatives from the oil company saying, "Oh my goodness, we're so sorry, and we're gonna pay people off."
There's a whole publicity campaign to go on.
Right. Yeah, we're gonna pay for advertising and all of this stuff. Because we're not really bad guys, right?
Yeah.
We just, you know, this accident happened. Not so in
we're just your friendly neighborhood capitalists, please.
Yeah, you know.
Please forgive us.
But in foreign countries, and especially in, you know, developing nations, they don't have to do that whole song and dance. First off, they don't have the safety standards within the bounds of that country. Because they don't know, like they don't have these massive excavation operations or, you know, all of this stuff. And so as a result, those redundant safety and security features don't exist there. And that's why the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, which we can do a whole separate episode about. That's why they do stuff like this, so they can commandeer land that is rich in resources in foreign countries, and they can displace people that no one cares about. Right? They displace.
It's not so much that people don't care about them; they just don't know. Right? Well, there's no like active like mechanism to like alert, say, the American public about it.
True. And that's hopefully the function that we're trying to fill right now.
Sure.
But they certainly, these people, they don't have a voice of their own.
Mm-hmm.
They're
not on the international stage anyway.
Absolutely not. And then even within their own country, they don't have a whole lot of pull because a lot of times they're not represented in the government anyways.
Mm-hmm. These places have oftentimes a professional political class that's just like almost a caste in and of itself.
Right.
And so, the common man, so to speak, it doesn't exactly rise up to political power, as happens here in America occasionally, although more often that's just a narrative here rather than actually being true.
Right, yeah. But yeah, okay, so to take one last look at this picture before we move on, look at all that yellow, even the yellow with the black lines through it. Mm-hmm. That is land that is slated to be leased, the diagonal line shaded area that is yellow. It just hasn't been forced over yet. If the country continues to default as
if they continue to default, what are they gonna do?
Yeah, they really have no choice at this point except to take a major loan from, guess who? The IMF. Good job, guys. And
classic company store style stuff.
Exactly. And yeah, the company store, I like that analogy. And this is an old term that here, we'll go back to us for a second. The concept of the company store goes back to early industrial revolution, mm-hmm. a little bit before, a little bit after. But this is when you have
Pullman,
sure.
All those people who sort of would. I mean, this even goes to like large-scale farming in that area as well.
Sure.
But people who would provide usually housing and then, not exactly food, but you could buy all your stuff from this person who had like basically, what do you call that? A vertical monopoly on all the resources around you.
Right. Well, yeah. So what they would do is, I'll use the coal mines. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you were a coal miner, you would be provided housing mm-hmm. as part of your pay. That's cool, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, nobody does that anymore, really.
The issue, sure. The issue was, and really,
now you can work and still not have a place to live, which is the craziest thing in the world.
Right. Yeah. It's actually how has it gotten worse from the company store
to the present
era?
Day? It boggles the mind.
So what the mining companies did was they would pay you not in American currency, mm-hmm. but they would pay you in company money that was only redeemable at the company store.
Yeah, it's sort of like Disney bucks.
Yeah, which is where your analogy stems from,
mm-hmm.
the term. And so the company store was the only store where you could buy stuff in the housing area that was provided to you. So you spent your money spent your paycheck at the company store because you couldn't do anything else because you weren't paid in American currency.
And then effectively, the money you're making is devalued.
Because it's worthless anywhere else.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, like, the prices they can charge you, how much you're making in sort of like real value is based on sort of like, the basket of goods and services you get, right? That's,
right.
So like, it's about earning or like spending power. So like, $1 might equal a loaf of bread somewhere. But like, if in the companies, if supposedly you're making $2 an hour and then the loaf of bread is $3.50, well, it's not as if you're really making the money they say you're making.
Yeah, and essentially what that is called is slavery.
Yeah, it's a more complicated method of enslaving somebody. It's an indentured servitude.
Exactly, and so this is what is happening. Like, this was originally just single corporations doing this to their employees. And horrible as it was a kind of small scale thing. In
Sure,
the grand
they
scheme
weren't.
of
They hadn't
things.
enslaved all of society.
Right, and this is the intent, in my opinion. Here, it's not just my opinion. It seems to be the intent. Evidence points to this.
Yeah. I mean, it seems pretty definitive. The IMF wants a controlling interest in Ecuador, and
And wherever else.
Yeah, sure.
And so-
Anywhere they can sink their claws. But the sad part about it is their interests lie with making the most money rather than what might be good for the place itself, the people who live there. Totally not the cultural values of anywhere. I mean, it's simply a money grab, and that's ghastly.
Yeah, it's really like it's inhuman.
Yeah, it's morally repugnant.
And unfortunately, as horrible as it is legal.
Yeah,
on the world stage.
Sure, and some people even applaud it as if the IMF is really helping people out.
Well, yeah, we'll get to what gets people jumping up and down in a second. But I wanted to so not only are they commandeering resources and making land grabs, they're also destroying people's health, and they are
By way of
creating-
polluting the atmosphere, the environment generally,
Exactly.
toxic waste runoff.
There's exactly all of those, and there is another thing that factors into it also, and those are magic word that you've heard everywhere: austerity measures.
Oh no, austerity.
Before the IMF comes in and devours your nation, what the IMF will do first.
Let's kill the libraries, everybody.
Yeah, so you have these austerity measures, and this is what people, when it's happening to them, they're like, no, we don't understand.
We got to tighten the belt.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, times are rough, tighten the belt. But when it happens to another nation that is not your own, the propaganda machine here is, this country, is destabilizing the whole Eurozone because they defaulted on their debt. It was a bank that defaulted. It was not the people. The people are not.
Yeah.
guilty
All
these
of Greece are
crimes.
out in the streets, just like fighting with each other and drinking in the middle of the day.
Yeah, just eating money.
Yep. Having big bonfires of classical antiquities and stuff.
Yeah.
Laughing at the International Monetary Fund.
Right.
Or the European Bank, rather,
Yeah,
whatever.
And one and the same, 6 to 1, half a dozen to another. But yeah, so these austerity measures, these are very insidious because people say, looking in from the outside, they say, well, you defaulted, you need all these austerity measures.
Certainly.
And that's what gets...
Well, let's cut back on basic services.
Yeah, that's what gets shown.
For the people of these countries, because of the sort of mismanagement of banking resources. Like what?
Yeah. So your health care goes from being free to being exorbitantly expensive because now your money is worthless.
Yep.
And so not only have you defaulted on
Usually hyperinflation sets in these scenarios.
yeah, and people are wallpapering their walls with money because that's more cost effective than actual wallpaper. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
They've taken the actual wallpaper off their walls and they're boiling it and making soup.
Yeah, they're eating the
Right.
paste.
Yeah, and so these austerity measures, they make services that were once free exorbitantly expensive and out of the reach of all but like the very wealthiest citizens. They
Of
do
which
that-
there always are. Usually those with ties to foreign interests.
Yeah, like the ones that bankrupted your country.
It could be anybody, any country, pretty much.
And so these are not only health and education and things like that, but they're also pensions, government pensions. All of your government employees that have worked their entire lives and now retired and thought they were going to live comfortably from the service to their nation.
Yeah, now they're SOL. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's people who had planned well. Now are basically, you know, if not out on the street, then in serious peril.
Absolutely. And yeah, so now you're not only taking health care away from people, you're not only making education and other public services, now you're stealing from old people.
Yeah, that is terrible.
And that's what austerity really is. And it creates, there was a study done by it's a journal, weekly peer-reviewed journal called the Public Library of Science.
Okay.
And in their medical journal, they did a study of nations that received aid from the IMF, and they found that all of those nations, every single one of them, had the occurrence of an increase in cases of tuberculosis of at least 16%.
That's really interesting. Now, why is that? Because of a reduction in health services, clearly, right?
Yeah.
That's horrible.
And then now you have, tariffs are much higher.
Sure.
The credit rating agencies of the world, because you defaulted on a loan, are now going to lower your credit rating, which is now going to make it more difficult for you to borrow money in the future, and you will have to pay a higher interest rate in the future. And also your import tariffs go up. So now if you are not a country that is rich in arable land to grow food, and you import a lot of your food against the natural resources of your country, you do trading and things like this, now you don't have enough food.
When that happens, things are going to quickly destabilize in your country. I mean, food, as is often said, is the one thing that people won't sort of sit around and just take.
Right. Yeah. There's going to be conflict over it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's when riots break out. When the government can't provide the most basic necessities to live: water, food. I mean, medical care. You might be able to get around that. I mean. But not water and food. Once those are gone, it's guillotine time.
It's a short ride to civil war.
Yeah,
or
precisely.
Some kind of revolution, and and then also with the exorbitant upshoot in the cost of healthcare, no one can afford it. No one goes to the doctor because they can't afford it. So now the doctors aren't getting paid. And if you're a doctor and you have medical training, chances are you'd like to get paid something for the work that you do. And if
Certainly.
And if no one can afford you because they can't afford to walk through the door, then you're going to leave, right?
Yeah.
And so what that represents is a huge, call it a brain drain or whatever. You have all of the skilled medical people leaving the country for greener pastures, and now you have, and that's why, cases that could be prevented and treated, like tuberculosis or, that's a lot of the reason why in certain places in Africa you have these massive explosions of like AIDS in the population. Because
sure, or recently, Ebola.
Right, any of these things, and they had to import doctors there because no one is there anymore to practice medicine.
Whereas you have these huge gluts of doctors trained all around the world in major metropolitan centers in the United States.
Yeah.
Where the doctor per capita ratio is exceedingly low, whereas you go someplace like the Sudan, and there might be one doctor for every like 2,500 people or something.
Right.
That's absurd.
Certainly not enough.
Yeah.
And austerity measures, they always suck. They never accomplish anything. It's really
big jeers to austerity.
Right. Yeah. Boo austerity.
And not going to work out. Not going to work out.
Then,
what is the economist that said that the government sort of has to spend money in situations of economic depression in order to sort of stimulate things. God, is that Keynes? I wanted to say it might be
Keynes.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar.
I think it may be him. I'll look into it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's one of those things where the mathematics of economics and economic theory is one of those things that is so convoluted that it really takes a kind of a shyster to understand it and to fully understand it and to practice it, because really no good ever comes from it. I mean, we can see how these things have played out over the last 80 years since these big giant conglomerate money lending agencies, they're loan sharks. And while here loan sharking is illegal, on the world stage, it's legal for
it's legal to loan shark a country.
Yeah.
But even if you can't do it to an individual.
And so and
sort of a double standard.
Yeah, it's and it's one of those things where it's not so far away from home as you might think. Like we said before, we have a very similar, almost identical banking system here, and it's called the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve came about with the 16th Amendment and the Federal Reserve Act. And when you look at the 16th Amendment, that's it right there, folks. It's a few very short words. I'll read it to you. It says, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration." So this basically is absolutely unconstitutional until they wrote an amendment making it legal for a government body to, or a government appointed body to collect unapportioned taxes. These are taxes that are not voted on by the people.
They're merely set by the government, and in fact, that's one of the reasons that we're just past Independence Day. But that's one of the reasons that we revolted against our British overlords in the beginning.
Exactly.
It's because taxation without representation. It's fundamentally un-American.
Yeah, and well, until 1913, as it turned out. And
now it's as American as apple pie.
So I mean, it is frightening. I don't know if you recognize this, watching from wherever you're watching, but these very few words have created a lot of problems for America. Not the least of which was the Great Depression. Not the least of which was the Great Recession of 2008. And
the effects of which are still felt today.
Of course. And yeah, so this came hand in hand. In the same year, they passed the Federal Reserve Act, which allowed, for the first time, it allowed a third party, the Federal Reserve Bank, to manufacture our money and guess what? Loan it to the nation's banks at interest. Okay, so this is the, for all intents and purposes, the exact same system that is going on in Europe, and it has bankrupted us on a number of occasions. We've lived through one of them. Our grandparents and great grandparents lived through the last ridiculous recession like this.
Speaking of the Depression, the stock exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, was offline for several hours earlier today.
Indeed.
And you think they would have just thought that up in 1929, right? All right, everything's a death spiral, just turn it off.
Yeah.
But I mean, that seems to be what happened. And then they came up with this absurd explanation that it was an update to their servers. Really? I doubt that so highly, especially since when it first occurred, there was no forthcoming information. I mean, it took them nearly 2 hours of stock market blackout to come up with just a goofy, threadbare explanation.
Yeah, Yeah, because their servers have never needed to be updated in the last, 30 years.
It just happens to happen when Greece is defaulting on debt and the Chinese stock market is tanking, and like it just happens that there's like a software glitch. I don't buy that for a second.
Yeah, well, and this is the insidious thing too. These countries that pay into the IMF, they also buy the debt of nations, and they, as a commodity, like they trade it back and forth.
Sure.
And then they're like, all right, well, who's gonna bully this country today? Oh, we own the debt, so we're gonna take your oil fields.
Yeah.
We're gonna take all of your arable farmland.
we need that collateral now.
We're gonna cut down all of your rainforest and make furniture out of it. And yeah, so the 16th Amendment was one of the nails in our coffin.
Sure.
And the best part, and by best I mean worst, this amendment was never properly ratified.
How's that?
Well, to ratify a document, the Congress all has to be present.
Mm-hmm.
A certain number of people in the majority have to ratify it, and they have to ratify the exact same document. They all have to have the exact same text in front of them, and this was never carried out satisfactorily.
Interesting.
It was one of those things that the big proponent of the bill he just said it passed, and especially with the Federal Reserve Act, which was the final nail in this whole thing that set this whole horrible system in play. It was announced the day before Christmas Eve, 1913, when guess who was attending in Congress? No one. No
Yeah,
one was
course.
there.
I mean,
it was announced to maybe 5 sitting congressmen, and so all of these. So the 16th Amendment and the Federal Reserve Act both passed under, or did not pass,
technically,
as it turns out. But either way, it was under very shady circumstances, and it's my argument and the argument of a growing number of people now that the 16th Amendment was not ever properly ratified, and therefore obviously should not be subject to any.
Yeah, it shouldn't carry the weight of law. I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And so, what's the solution to all of this, right? And I don't have a
Escape to
photographic
Canada.
for it. Well, it's one of those things where when we had this problem in 2008,
Mm-hmm.
we gave the banks $1 trillion almost, and we're like, all right, just here, problem, go away.
And it sure did, right? Everything's great now.
And it kind of trickled back into appearing to be better.
Sure.
Unemployment is a little bit less than it was, and it's a little bit easier to go get a job or get a bank loan
Then 7 years ago. It took 7 years.
Exactly. Now,
That's as old as my son. My son has only been
right.
around in recession world.
Well, it puts it into perspective, right?
It boggles me. I mean, I realize that it's very big and complex systems that are at work here. But to think that it took almost 7 years for things to just be a little bit better, that's astounding.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a similar thing that happened during the Depression. It took a while to get out of it, and that was like, organized, I don't want to call them labor camps, but like the CCCs, they called them, the Community Conservation Corps.
Sure.
And the nation went through this whole big employment campaign of like, hey, are you out of work? We need people to do this.
Yeah.
And so you had people that you could just show up, and they had all this grunt work for you to do. These people
digging ditches and
stuff.
stuff.
They dug ditches. They they cleared fire trails in the mountains. They whatever else. They dug levees in the
Absolutely.
Down in the bayous or whatever. And so this was a massive campaign to help get people back to work.
I mean, it's interesting they don't do that now or haven't even attempted it because the nation's infrastructure as it is aging. And
Yeah,
especially
it's falling
in,
apart in places.
yeah, especially in sort of the middle of the country, it's more and more neglected, and it's it could be a really great sort of a stimulus measure to do something like that. It's strange that it's never been sort of seriously on the table.
Yeah, well, because they don't want the problem to be solved.
Yeah, right.
They want it to.
They just want it to linger.
They want it, yeah, they want it to be perpetual, and they want you to get used to it.
Yeah, it's
So-
the new normal.
So here's where your living standard was, and then we crashed the market, and now it's here, and we're gonna let that stabilize, and like you said, be the new normal until we crash it again, and then we're gonna do this.
Yeah.
And it's just that slippery slope that I don't see the government changing. I don't see the core way of doing things changing in a way that will prevent that from happening in the future.
What do you think about Bernie Sanders?
I want to like him.
Mm-hmm.
I want to like him like I wanted to. I wanted to like Clinton, and I did for a while. But then he was a big proponent of this IMF.
Yeah, I mean, and also privatization of public utilities and stuff, which is just silly.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to think that those people came into office with the best intentions and were just stymied along the way. I mean, I don't really have any feelings one way or another about Obama, but I know that some of the things, or everything he has tried to do that has had public support, has just, the opposite side of the room has just been like, nope, we don't even care if it's a good idea. We're just going to say no and stand against it because it's him and we don't like him.
That's very many of his stances and policies have been sort of fought on exactly that level.
Yeah, and it's that kind of grade school pissing match that it's like we're going to bully you, and
Sure.
Whereas the high school bully or the elementary school bully did not have authority. Mm-hmm. There was a higher power than the bully that could put him in check and say, you need to stop this right now. That safeguard isn't there. They are the safeguard, and it's this kind of self-manufactured, we're going to put a committee together and look into it, and then whatever happens.
It's a certain amount of immaturity present there. I mean, in grown men that they simply refuse to work together. I mean, that's one of the things you learn as an adult, is that there's a lot of people that are different than you who want different things than you, and to get along in life, you need to work with them, or you're not going to get very far. And if you can't, if an elected official and a grown person can't be made to understand that, then they have no business representing the public interest.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Unfortunately, the system is backwards, and the solution, unfortunately, does not involve anything that can be done within the government. You have to do basically like what I think Greece is attempting to do right now, and leave, just stop playing the game. It's like that movie War Games.
Yeah.
Where the war, the computer that they taught to do the war simulations thought that it was real, and it was actually arming the missiles to launch at Russia and whatever.
I just realized Michael Madsen was in that film.
Really?
Yeah, that was his first sort of professional film. He did one that was sort of crappy before that. But like I just rewatched War Games actually.
It's a great movie.
It's a great movie.
And a great, very simple metaphor, really, for what's going on right now. The best solution is not to play. And these are what countries like, and I hope Greece follows through with what they are attempting, which is to leave the European Union, to investigate these corruptions, and to throw the appropriate
Frankly, I
people
think the
in
European
prison.
Union was a mistake to begin with.
Yeah, they let it work for about 15 years, And it seemed pretty utopian. Oh, it's all the free education and healthcare. And then, and that should be the case everywhere. The
Certainly.
resources of your country should provide for those things.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But Iceland did a similar thing. They did the opposite of what we did. We threw $1 trillion at the banks, and that was our solution as a government. What Iceland did was they held investigations and they threw people in prison, and they found people to determine that no, we actually don't owe you this money. You took a risk. You made a risky investment, and if you make a risky investment, if you bet $1,000 on black at the casino and it comes up red, you don't get to stomp your feet and say, well, I need
I might do that, but they're not going to listen to me.
Yeah, they're going to laugh at you.
Yeah, certainly.
Because you made a risky investment, you knew it was risky, and you don't get to get a do-over or a mulligan, or you don't get to own the casino afterwards. So I know we're running out of time for you, Vince. I want to thank you again for being here.
It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it,
Vince,
as always.
Vince has promises to keep and miles to go before he sleeps.
Indeed so. Thank you, everyone. It's been great being here on Truth and More. Farewell.
I know you got a lot on your plate, but I hope we can do it again sometime.
Perhaps.
All right,
bye-bye.
Man, take care. Oh my goodness, everyone. So, and yeah, thanks once again to Vince, who has Vince. He was sitting there, and now he went that way. I want to thank him again. He's a knowledgeable person. He's also got some good comedic sensibilities too, and we like having him here. I think he keeps that alien in the window from attacking me as well, but yeah, it's these things that you see on the news that, as we are wont to do here, to try and expose these things. And when you see the propaganda on the news and you feel yourself being convinced to say something like, "Well, screw those people," that's probably not the way it really was. And so, unfortunately, I forgot to bring my book with me, but there's a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and it is a very good source book for information about this kind of thing. Before it was happening in Europe, it was happening in South America. The overthrow of democratically elected leaders. If you're my age, you were a little kid when these things were happening on the news. But looking back into it and understanding what those reasons were are outlined in Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's an excellent book. Unfortunately, I can't recall the name of the author, but it's a pretty easily remembered title. Look into it, and there's a lot of that person's personal experiences as an economist who was basically paid and sent around the world by these sort of international banksters, as they've come to be called recently, to do resource speculation in these places, and it's disgusting what has been allowed to happen in these third world countries, and it's going to happen here eventually again. It's happening in other places that were the sort of pinnacle of what's the word? The pinnacle of like prosperity, and it's a shame, because all of the reasons why you're told it's happening are not really the case. These reasons are told to you by the exact the same entities that are causing these problems. They're also paying for the newscasters to tell you the real reason why these things are going on. And there's a lot more to it than that. So next time you're watching the news, read between the lines. Thanks for watching. Wherever you're going, get there safe. Good night.